very basics of what we mean by cybersecurity. I'm trying to motivate at first why we need cybersecurity for IoT, and then give you the fundamentals of security, and then hopefully we will lead it. This will be used to lead into our subsequent discussion on machine learning. And, one of the main applications for machine learning, as far as I'm concerned, is security. Hopefully, okay. Alright, so yesterday we were trying to motivate cybersecurity and applications and various things and so on, right? And we were talking in terms of 2020. So we have so many devices on the network now. In 2020 there will be so many devices and so on. Traffic will go up, and so you're projecting 3-4 years down the line. But what we also, I'll try to start off with today is to say, where we are right now. How far along have we gone in terms of actual deployment of IoT? So every January, right, every year in January, there's a big convention called the Consumer Electronics Show, and it's usually in Las Vegas in the United States. And everybody comes there, all equipment manufacturers, the traditional ones. Consumer electronics, you would think like DVD players, computer, PCs, and games and so on. But it's not just limited to them these days. Even car makers, chip makers like Intel, everybody goes there. Right? So let's see, and this is almost 2 years ago, what kind of things people already have on the market. Right? So this one is an air freshener. Right? So you plug it in, and it releases scent every so often. And what people have figured out is that if you have air, so if you just release the scent, it will just stay there, right? It will not disperse all across the room. So ideally, if you want the best case that you release some scent, but it should disperse all across your room, it should be timed with your air conditioner. So if you have air conditioner at home, it turns on, right? It blows for a while, then it turns off when it's cool enough. So what this guy does is it synchronizes itself. So it realizes when the air conditioner just went on, then it will release, and then it's a very simple thing, but it's there. Then this is a smart fridge by Samsung, right? It can keep track of what you have in your fridge, and then if you run out of milk, it can automatically order from the supermarket, and they'll come and deliver stuff at your home. Could be good or bad, but it's coming. Most kids these days play with drones, I guess, in some sense. And then this car manufacturer has this thing integrated with their drone. So the drone can fly, and while your car is moving, it can land on top of your car. Land any surface. Then we have all these medical devices, and we were talking about these yesterday. So starting with your fitness trackers like Fitbit and other things, and you have much more specialized medical instruments like those who monitor your blood pressure, heart rate, and even can administer drugs into your body. And then there are applications for more traditional infrastructure kind of things like smart grids and power grids and transportation systems and so on. Right? So what it says is that we don't really have to wait till 2020. There are many applications and devices which are already on the market, which fulfill some vision of IoT, right? So we don't have to wait that long. So the market is going there, people are adopting these technologies and so on, right? But, and that's where the but comes in, there are still some concerns regarding adoption of IoT. And one of the biggest concerns is security. If I am a manager and I have to make a decision, should I adopt IoT kind of based technologies or not? One thing I will think of is, if I adopt it, what are the chances that something will go wrong? And one of the ways that things can go wrong is if somebody hacks into my system or compromises my system and makes it do things that it shouldn't be doing. Right? I'll give you some examples which have happened. So this one is a nuclear reactor in Iran. And back in 2010, it was attacked by a virus called Stuxnet. Right? And these nuclear power plants, these are not like they're connected to the internet and you can log into them and so on. These are physically separated and what are called air gapped. So this is a term you'll hear quite often with IoT. Or air gap means there is no outside connection from the system. You have your own internal thing, internal network maybe, but it is not connected to the outside. So sitting here, I cannot really connect to the computers and other things here. But things can still go wrong. Why? Because these are computers anyway, right? So at home I might be using, so I just plugged in this my USB memory stick here, right? If this is infected now, and I go to my work, and I work in this nuclear power plant, and I plug in this memory stick, that can get infected. And that's how they did it. Who did it? Some say Israel and Iran. Sorry, this is Iran. Some say the United States and Israel. Nobody can prove it, so who knows? Right, so as a result, so in a nuclear power plant, you have centrifuges which spin around and they purify the radioactive stuff or whatever, right? And that sort of crashed. And some people say this put back Iran's nuclear program by a couple of years or whatever, right? But if you're in the shoes of Iran, you don't want this to happen to you, right? So you want to be careful. So if I know that some things like this can happen, then I'll be very careful about adopting IoT technology. Right? There are other examples. So this is Ukraine, right? And I think 2-3 years back, Russia and Ukraine had a fight over one part of eastern Ukraine called Crimea, right? And Russia sort of came in and took it from Ukraine. At least that's one version. Russians probably say something else, but Ukrainians say that Russians came and took our stuff. Then later on what happened is Russians, they hacked into the power plants in eastern Ukraine and they were able to shut down power for about 2-3 days in winter, which is very severe in those days. Right? So that's another. This is a water treatment plant in Lansing in Michigan in the United States. And these guys became victim of ransomware. And I think in May earlier this year we had this WannaCry thing. It wasn't WannaCry, but something else. Some employee clicked on a link which they shouldn't have clicked, or an attachment they shouldn't have opened, and all the computers got hacked and their files got encrypted and so on. They had to pay some money to get things started. And then this is Aramco, which is a Saudi Arabian oil producing company. And by some estimates, they produce about 15 to 20% of the world's oil. And back in 2012, so this was the month of Ramadan, which is, almost everything shuts down in the Middle East around those days. So during the holiday period, people hacked into their system and they started erasing all the data from hard disks. And not just that, they would get into the firmware of the hard disk. And in a hard disk, what happens? There's a disk like this, which keeps spinning, magnetic thing, and there's a head on top of it. It's very much like a record player, if you remember what a record player is, right? You put the needle on top, and then it spins and it reads. So this is sort of what a hard disk looks like. And then this head is controlled. It moves, and then it reads from different sectors of the disk. The malware crashed it. So this one would touch the disk. This shouldn't, if you touch the disk, you're gone. Your disk is destroyed, your head is destroyed. So they would crash the disks. Once the disk is crashed, most of the time, you cannot extract the data back anymore. There are some ways in which you can extract when you have to ship it to a place. They would break it open, then they would read individually. But that costs about, last time my hard disk crashed and I tried to do this, it wanted $10,000. What is 10,000? What, 5 lakh rupees or 6 lakh rupees, right? So that's a lot of money. And you can't really do it for every disk. So they had no way anyway. So what happened is their whole operation shut down. And in order to supply oil and so on, they had to resort to technologies 20 years ago, like fax machines, which people don't really use much these days. Supply of oil stopped across Saudi Arabia. People couldn't buy petrol to fill in their cars and whatever. So what they had to do is, they had to buy new hard disks to replace the old hard disks. And again, if you think about how these things work, right? So we can go to a shop and buy a hard disk, right? But the main buyers of hard disks are not individuals. Like, how many times have you gone and bought a hard disk? Maybe once or twice in the last 10 years. But who buys hard disks? Computer manufacturers. Lenovo would buy hard disks, Dell would buy hard disks, right? HP would buy hard disks. And they don't go on a day-to-day basis. They will tell the hard disk manufacturer that I want a supply of 50,000 hard disks after 3 weeks or after 2 months, something like that. They will give advance order. And most of them are manufactured, for example, in Thailand, Malaysia makes quite a few, Taiwan makes hard disks and so on. So these guys, they have money. So they flew a private plane all the way to Thailand, bought all the hard disks by paying double the money. So if you're on the market for hard disks back in 2013, I would say, I'm sure you don't remember, or probably you weren't on the market in those days, the prices of hard disks went up because the Saudis bought up everything. But anyway, that's a different story, but the problem is their business shut down and they had to suffer. Some people claim in the order of billions of dollars of losses. They will not, of course, say how much loss they had, but that's what people guess. Anyway, so these are concerns which are out there. And these are real-life examples of cyber attacks on IoT or cyber physical systems and so on. Right? Now, these are practical attacks, and as academics, what we also worry about is possibilities of attack, even though they may not have been, but we want to look what could possibly happen and hopefully try and prevent that. And another thing is with these kind of attacks, right? Many times people will not come out and say that we have been attacked because it creates a negative impression, right? Uber, the car, the taxi kind of thing, they got hacked. They didn't tell anybody, right? It only came out after many months when they had to finally confess. Nobody wants to say that we were hacked. So many times things happen and they don't say. And especially things like power systems and so on, which are considered national, whatever, infrastructure or priority, if they get hacked, people don't say. So anyway, now let's look at some other examples which are sort of academic, but definitely possible. Right? So in many places, you have metro rails and so on, right? And Professor Gupta was saying that Varanasi is getting one metro train at some point, right? And in Calcutta we have one, Delhi has one. So in many cases, these are driverless. So these are our trains in Singapore. They don't have any drivers driving, they're autonomous and so on, right? And what happens is, these are electrical systems, so they run on electricity, they're not diesel or anything else. And if you think about this, what does a train have? It has a motor inside, right? So when you want the train to move, you turn on the motor, it starts running, and then your train moves. And when you want to stop, you start decelerating the motor, and at some point it will stop. So now think about it from an electrical system. What is happening? So your motor is a load, and it's drawing power from an electrical line. And when you start, it's different. When you're running at steady state, the load you draw is different. And when you're slowing down, the load is different. It keeps changing. And if you're an electrical engineer, you would know that some of the load is what is called reactive load. Some of it is real and imaginary kind of thing. Right? So anyway, so what happens is when the load varies, so the amount of current you draw, that also varies. And when that happens, the voltage level. So right, if you think about this, it should be 230 volts in India, right? The ones in the train is much higher in the order of a few kilovolts, but that varies. We don't want that. So what do? So let's say these are the train tracks, right? These are the train tracks. At different places, we put meters to measure the voltage, right? And this one feeds it back. So let's say this is a voltmeter. I put it by V. This measures, okay, what is the voltage right now? If it goes up, we should step it down. If it goes down, we should step it up, right? So this is a control loop, and then this will control the voltage. And now imagine the attack. How is this meter reading coming back? Through a network. Right? This is what you can think of as an IoT device. It's measuring the voltage, it's sending the data over this network, maybe there are many routers along the way. If I'm a hacker, I get into this router. I take control of this thing. And I see that your data is going, right? What I have to do is, I don't do much. I just delay your packet. As soon as the packet comes in, I should send it up. I said, no, I'll make it delayed. By how much? Not by much. Few hundred milliseconds maybe. So what happens? This controller, instead of getting the value right now, it gets the value which is 100 milliseconds or 200 milliseconds earlier, something like that, right? So the control it does is not the right one. It's based on outdated data. As a result, your system starts becoming unstable. Right? Your feedback is not timely, you're not using the information that is right now. Maybe right now the voltage is something else, so the control you should be applying is something else. But you're looking at old data. And in these cases, 200, 300 milliseconds is quite old. Right? And if that happens, your system becomes unstable, your voltage will start oscillating, and at some point the voltage will go so low or so high that your relays will trip. And when that happens, your train stops wherever it is. So that's one possibility of an attack. People worry about those things. When did we, well, doesn't matter when I started, right? You have lunch at 11:30, which cannot be postponed, so we stop at 11:30 or so. Another thing, right? Now let's still electricity based. Now let's come to what we think our power grids will be in the future, right? So India, I don't know so much, but from what I understand is everything is owned by the government, starting from the generators to the transmission lines which take power from, let's say, a dam or a thermal power plant, all the way to the city and then all the way to the home. They're all owned by the government. I may be mistaken on that, but that's what I think, right? But in many countries, for example in the US, they're all owned by private companies. So a dam will be owned by a private company, let's say. A thermal power plant will be owned by a private company. Right? And now people have solar panels on their home. They supply power themselves to the grid. So let's not worry about the solar power. Let's say we have these, so in Singapore, for example, a small country, we have 8 different companies which generate power. And they supply power to a different grid operator. It's a different company altogether. That company's job is, there are other companies which produce power. I will take power from them and supply to the customer, like my home. Right? So there's a middleman. So anyway, so what these guys have to do, if I'm the power operator, I need to know how much power I should buy from the generator. Right? How do I know how much power to buy from the generator? I should know how much my consumers consume. How do I know how much consumers? Usually I would have to have some kind of a historical data maybe. So I see, okay, these houses in every month, they consume these many kilowatt hours. And where things are going right now is smart meters. So previously what happens, you have a meter at home. Some guy or girl comes at the end of the month, takes a meter reading, and then in the mail, a bill shows up and then you go and pay somewhere, right? So that's changing. And now you have smart meters at home. I'm sure it'll come here in a few years maybe, if it's not here already. They can measure your consumption in the order of every minute if you want, or every few seconds if you want. And they will automatically transmit the data to the power operator, power grid operator. So nobody has to come to your home to see how much you have consumed. And instead of having data whose granularity is 1 month, so I only know how much you consumed in 1 month right now. I don't know how much you consume on Sundays and how much you consume on Mondays, right? If you live at home, if it's a home, you can imagine that on Sundays consumption will be higher than Monday. People are not at home, something like that, right? That's important for the power grid operator. If I know exactly how much you're going to consume, then I can tell the generator, this is how much I need. And usually in the West, this happens in every few hours. Every few hours the grid goes and says, okay, for the next 2 hours, please give me this much. And then there are these 8 generators in Singapore, for example, they would compete. It's okay, your demand is, just like in a shop, right? You can go, you want to buy this notebook, you can go to 5 different shops, whoever gives you the least price, you buy from them, right? It happens in the power world too. So you say for the next 2 hours, my demand is this. All the power generators will give you their bid. Right? They say, okay, I will give you the power, but I charge this much. And you can choose who is the cheapest, the most reliable, whatever your metric is. Right? But in order to do that, you need these demand estimates. The more accurate your estimate of demand is, then you can negotiate better. If you think your demand is too low and you don't buy enough, later on you have to go for a blackout or what do you call it? Load shedding. If you think your demand is high, you buy a lot of power, but your actual demand is low, then you are wasting your money. Right? And what happens is, how am I going to get this demand? What people think about now is these smart meters will give me demand. Smart meters will give me a very, very accurate estimate of the demand of power. But again, how is that smart meter data going to come to the electric grid operator? Through a network, through the internet. Right? And if you imagine a situation where these smart meter data are being lost, let's say again I have taken over one of the routers along the way, and I drop all your packets. What happens? Then the grid operator doesn't get the information. It doesn't know what the actual demand is. So then it will ask for wrong amount of power from the generators. So this sort of shows, as the packet drop rate increases, you lose more and more data, the mismatch will increase and the cost will go up. So this is another implication of a cyber attack. And then another thing people are very, very worried about is attacks on medical devices. If you have a medical device on your body and I can control it, I could potentially kill you. Your heartbeat is something, I show it something else. In the worst case, in the simplest case, at least you'll get a call from a doctor which you didn't want. In a more severe case, I will give you the wrong amount of medication. And then that will create problems for you. So there are all these things that go on. And another thing with specific to IoT, which is quite recent, which happened, and this one specifically hacked IoT devices. Right? And last year in October, there was a denial of service attack. Familiar with denial of service? Right? So in this, in denial of service, what we do is, let's say we have this server, right? And we have all these. So this is my server which I'm running. Right? Let's say I'm an e-commerce, I'm Flipkart, some equivalent of Flipkart. People come to my server and buy things. How do they connect to my server? I have to have a link. I have to buy from an ISP, internet service provider like Vodafone or whoever it is, to give me this internet connection. And then users all over the world, they will connect to my server. Now, how much bandwidth should I have here? I have to tell that to my ISP, right? Give me a link of 5 Gbps or 1 Gbps or 100 Mbps. How do I know? Depends on what's my usual customer, how many customers come in my system every day. Right? Then I can say this. But now in a denial of service attack, what usually happens is there are a lot of other computers which are usually not my customers. They also start sending requests to me. And who are these? Usually these are computers which have been taken over by let's say hackers. Could be my PC, could be your PC, whatever it is. These are what are called botnets. Right? So bots are computers which have been taken over by an external person, and they can control my computer to do whatever. Most of the time you wouldn't know if your computer is a botnet, is part of a botnet. It will stay idle most of the time, but once in a while it will send all of these crazy things. So what happens when this works? So one thing is, this link will get overloaded. So if now a legitimate customer, a real customer comes in and tries to go here, his or her packet will not make it inside. That's one way of launching a denial of service. The other one is, this is, let's say, a web server. Right? It's a web server. So how do I connect to it? HTTP, right? Using HTTP. So HTTP, you can think as the application layer. So you're talking about layers. So HTTP is application layer. What's below? What's the transport layer? HTTP uses TCP, right? And in TCP, yesterday, as we were saying, before you actually start transmitting data, you have to establish a connection. And the way TCP establishes a connection is this. Let's say this is the client, and this is the server. Let's say the client is initiating the connection. The client will first send a packet called a synchronized packet or a SYN packet. This basically tells the server, I want to start a connection with you. And let's say the server is willing, and TCP connections are two-way. You can send data, and the other side can also send data to you. Right? So when this SYN is being sent, what it is really doing is, it's allowing if this connection is set up, the client can send data to the server. So it's in this direction, in this direction. We also want the reverse direction. Let's say the server is willing to accept this. It will send an acknowledgement saying, okay, I accept your request for connection in this direction. But the server may also want to send me data. For that, it sends its own SYN. So they're all in the same packet, just 2 bits in the header are set. So there's a SYN plus ACK. And in order to, all right, SNY, why have I written SNY? SYN. And in order to acknowledge this, I send an ACK back. At this point, this is a 3-way handshake. At this point, my 3-way handshake is done, and now I can start sending the real data. Another way of launching a denial of service attack is, I send a SYN packet. You reply back with an ACK and a SYN. The server will reply back. And I don't do anything about it. I just leave it hanging. So what happens at the server? What the server has to do is, for every person connecting to the server, it has to maintain a TCP connection. What does maintaining a TCP connection mean? It means in the server's memory, you have to remember these things. That a SYN came from a particular IP address. Let's say 128.113.5.4. So in its memory, it has to keep a table saying 128.113.5. whatever, there's a connection going on. And so on. And memory is finite, right? You don't have infinite. No server, a server may have a lot of memory, but it's still finite. Right? And what I do is, I send a SYN, and the server is expecting something to come back, I don't reply, I don't bother. I just give. And then I send another SYN from another one of my botnet or bots. So what happens is the memory of the server fills up. And at some point when a real customer tries to connect, there's no more memory here. Or the processor becomes so slow that it cannot provide a response back to you. So that this is a denial of service attack. And the other thing which is a critical part of the internet is a DNS thing, right? Domain name service or DNS. And what this is that, as humans, it's much more easier for us to remember names like www.yahoo.com. But if I really want to connect to www.yahoo.com, I need an IP address. The computers don't understand www.yahoo.com, they only understand IP addresses. But for me, I can remember 1 or 2 of these. But I cannot remember this for hundreds of websites. My human brain doesn't work like that, right? So this DNS, domain name service, does this translation for us. So you give it a name like this, a URL or whatever name, a host name, it will give you the corresponding IP address. Without this, we really cannot access anything. You tell me go to flipkart.com. If there is no translation to the IP address, you cannot go. Right? And these DNS servers do all this translation for us. And last year what happened is people took over some IoT devices. And then they started sending messages to DNS servers. DNS servers got overloaded. So when a real user came in and wanted to do a translation from the server, they wouldn't get the translation. As a result, you cannot access the website that you want to. And what kind of IoT devices did they hack into? Cameras. Why cameras? Because if you go back here, in order to launch a denial of service attack, what do you need? You need to send a lot of data. For example, here, you want to overwhelm this link. If this link is 5 Gbps, that's it. You want to send more than 5 Gbps here. Who sends a lot of data? Who generates a lot of data? Video, right? Video streams are much higher data rate than anything else that we usually have. Right? So they would take over a lot of these IP cameras, and then they started directing their traffic to those DNS servers. And how did they get into their cameras? Turns out it's very easy. Most of these have a username and password through which you can change things, right? If you have the username and password, you can go in and you can say whatever video you are capturing, that traffic you send to this particular IP address. And how easy it is? So the username is root, right? And this is for, did I have the thing? I can't remember the name of this camera, but it's a Chinese-made camera. The username is always root, and the password is always XC3511. So if you have one of these cameras, your friend also has one of these cameras, you can easily get into your friend's camera and change it to do whatever you want it to do. And this is what most hackers do. They go to all kinds of devices which are out in the market, and then they try to find vulnerabilities. In this case, it was very easy. They all had the same username and password, and they could get it. This was not the only thing they hacked into. They hacked into a lot of things. And this is just an example of how things are. And you have to see how much these hackers have evolved over time and how much their capabilities are. So for example, this attack I'm talking about is October of 2016, right? And in April of 2016, they launched an attack on this particular website. The same people. At that time, their maximum rate was 620 gigabits per second. Right? So they had enough botnets, enough bots in their botnet, so that they could launch an attack, but the total rate was 620. It's a lot of data, a lot of traffic. Right? And sometime again in August, so that's April, May, June, July, May, June, July, August, 4 months later, they could go up to 990 gigabits per second. And this is October, 1,200 gigabits per second. So attackers are very sophisticated and quite capable. But then, if you might think, oh, these might be really highly qualified hackers or people who could get in and do these things. In fact, it's not very difficult. You can rent it yourself. If you know where to look for these things, you can go and you can see people who will sell botnets to you. They have control over these computers, and you can go and say, all right, I have to, so let's say after this course you hate it so much, right? You say, I'm going to show this guy from Singapore, right? I'm going to take down his website. So what you can go is you can go there and you can rent it. You can rent a botnet. It's not very expensive. Well, I don't know how much is $20 to you, but between $20 to $50 an hour per month. So you go there, they will sell out they will give you a very nice GUI, graphical user interface. After you've paid the money, of course. You just have to say who you want to attack, give that person's IP address or whatever, and then for 1 hour, they will just launch a denial of service on that. And in this particular one, this is called the Mirai botnet, and a couple of Israeli guys were selling it. And even if you know what's the dark net, you can go there and search for these things, and you'll find many things to hide. And yesterday when we were talking about cloud computing, we were talking about different kinds of services, infrastructure as a service, software as a service. So you can think of this as a software, as a cloud-based service for software. What does the software do? launch denial of service attacks. So you really don't need to know computer science anymore to launch denial of service or anything like that. It's fairly easy. And there's a table which shows, what people expect, the amount of damage these attacks do. Right, any questions so far on any of this?
Can we implement Internet of Things in the Indian Railway for the purpose of taking the track conditions?
Yes, sure. And many countries already do that. So for example, at least in Singapore, I know they have sensors along the track and do various things. So for example, one of the things railway people are worried about are cracks in the track. Right? And there are many ways in which you can find out the crack. For example, you can launch a sort of an equivalent of an X-ray thing, and you see small cracks appear. Other people have figured out way in which the way the track vibrates, they figure out if a crack is coming or not. So people do that, and I'm sure Indian Railways will also do it, if they're not doing it already.
Can you monitor the...
Sorry?
We are running a project in RDSO Lucknow.
Okay.
Train-based monitoring system.
Yeah. So they have something. Anything else? All right. So that was sort of a motivation to why we want to worry about cybersecurity, right? And now what we will do is we will, what is it, 9, 10, okay. So what we will do is we'll try to get into understanding. So this is a high level overview of what kind of bad things can happen to us if we don't pay attention to security. So now let's approach it in a much more systematic way, see what security actually means, and how we can achieve it. And the way I have is in the end today, so right now I'm going to talk in very general terms. So this is security, it could be for IoT, it could be for any computer-based system, right? Particularly I'll talk about network security. I'm not talking about worms and viruses that infect your computer. I'm not talking software security here. I'm just talking network security. This is applicable to IoT or even your traditional internet. And towards the end I have some things which are much more researchy in a way. I don't know if we have time or not, but if we don't have time, we can continue tomorrow if you're interested, or tomorrow we'll do something new. So we'll just I'll poll you at the end and we'll decide what to do. Alright. So let's start with what is network security, right? What do we mean by network security? So in general, these are the 4 things we care most about when we are talking about network security. The first one is confidentiality. So confidentiality means if I send a message to you, only you should be able to know what is written in that message. Anybody else, they may hear the message, but they shouldn't know what's in there. What does it say? Because when I send the data on a network, anybody can listen to it, right? So if I'm doing a wireless transmission here on Wi-Fi, everybody else here can listen to the same thing. You also have a radio, you can listen to it. But even though you listen to it, you shouldn't know what's in there, what's written in that message. So that's confidentiality. And the way it's done is, the sender, when he or she has the message, before sending it, they will encrypt it. And on the receiving side, the receiver has to decrypt the message. And we'll look at some basic ways in which we do encryption and decryption in real-world systems. Then the next one is authentication. So authentication says, if you claim to be somebody, you have to prove that you are that person. Right? So when you go to the airport, they look for your, what do they look for? Aadhaar card? Or something like that, right? Or at least for me, they look for the passport. I have to show my passport, and then they say, all right, fine, you're who you claim. And then you go in, right? When you log on to your email, you have a username and a password. That sort of verifies who you are. So that's authentication. Then there is message integrity. So in this case, I'm sending a message to you. I want the message to reach you exactly as I sent it. For example, if I bought something online and the credit card bill was 100 rupees, and I sent a message saying 100 rupees, nobody should be able to change that to 1,000 rupees. Or I shouldn't be able to change it to 1 rupee, right? Either way. So that's message integrity. Whatever you send, that's what the other person gets. Nobody changes it. Or at least if somebody changes it, you know that it has been changed. It has been tampered with. It has been forged. So once you know it, then you can discard it. You say, okay, fine, I don't care about this. That's not. And the other thing in terms of networks is access and availability. So that exactly relates to this denial of service thing. So in this case, what happened? I lost availability and access. So I had a web server. Somebody launched a denial of service attack on it, and my real customers couldn't access the service I was providing. So ideally, I want to prevent this also. So these are the 4 main goals. And we will see how we can achieve each one of these. So let's start with the first one, confidentiality, and then so how many have you done a security course? 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, fine. It's less than 10% of the class. So I guess I can go into basics, right? By the way, I was talking to Professor Gupta, and then I said, when I asked how many of you have done a networks course, I said about half of them pulled up their hands. And he said, they must be shy. Most of them must have been. So don't be shy. If you have done it, just raise your hand. It's okay, right? So not a problem. So let's talk about language here first, right? So now we are talking about network security, right? So network means there is a sender and a receiver. Right? So we could talk in terms of the sender is sending it, the receiver is receiving. But in general, if you pick up any security book or a crypto book, we don't say sender, receiver, they're names. The sender is usually Alice for A. The receiver is usually always Bob for B. And then there's the attacker or the adversary. Usually 2 names. Trudy stands for intruder. Right? And the other one you will also see is Eve, or eavesdropper, somebody who listens onto your conversation. Right? So these are the names. And this is what, as networks people, what we will assume is that the sender's thing is secure. So if I'm sending from my laptop, this is not a laptop. If I'm sending from my laptop is secure, and the receiver's computer is also secure. The device is secure. But the network itself, the channel, right? When the message leaves my computer, goes inside the network, then there are no guarantees. So the adversary is here. And what the adversary can do is, so in this case it's a girl, I don't think all girls are bad, but she can listen on and do things, right? So for example, she can listen to what's going on here. She can change messages. She can change the contents of the messages. She can insert messages of her own. She can record the messages which are going on and play them back later. Reuse the same messages later on. Right? So those things can happen. Right. So in real life, of course, here we're talking about Alice and Bob, but in a real life network, of course, there could be real humans trying to communicate. Or, they could be web servers and a browser. So Alice is a browser, Bob is a web server, and then, it could be a DNS. So Bob could be a DNS server, Alice could be a browser requesting a translation. It could be just 2 routers in the network. So how do routers set up routes? They have to exchange tables. They have to exchange information between them so they know what's the best path. So 2 computers exchanging information like that. And there are many other examples. And this is sort of where I was just talking about what can a bad guy or a girl do. They can eavesdrop. They can listen onto your messages, for example. Right? You send something, they can listen. They can insert messages into the connection. Alice didn't send this message, Bob didn't send it. Trudy inserted the message on her own, pretending maybe to be either Alice or to be Bob. Right? Impersonation. Trudy can pretend to be either Bob or Alice and start sending messages in the network. They can hijack a session. Alice and Bob, they had established a connection like this. And Trudy comes in the middle and intercepts this message and sends an hack of her own of some kind. That's hijacking the session. And then denial of service that we talked about. Okay. So these are some of the possibilities. This is not an exhaustive list, but some of the possibilities. So now with this, let's come to the basic principles of cryptography. So in the language of cryptography, so let's say Alice is going to send a message to Bob, right? So Alice types a message, and let's say this is in English. So the message which everybody can read, and you don't need to do any, you don't need to decrypt it. That's called a plain text. So this is a message everybody can read. Before she sends it, she encrypts it. She passes it through an encryption algorithm. And this algorithm needs something called an encryption key. So Alice has a key which she will use it to encrypt. After encryption, the output is ciphertext. So this is encrypted message. Trudy can see this, but hopefully she doesn't know what it says. And the ciphertext is what will come to Bob. Bob has to decrypt it. And in order to decrypt, he has to apply his own key. And hopefully you'll get a plain text out. And the notation usually, the different versions, the notation I'm using is M will be the plain text message. This is in English or Hindi or whatever your language is, right? And this notation says, this message was encrypted using Alice's key. Okay, KA says Alice's key. So I took the message and I encrypted it with Alice's key. So this is my ciphertext. So the ciphertext is this, message M encrypted with Alice's key. What does Bob get? Bob gets this. So he runs his decryption on this thing. And this is the decryption operation. So this is the ciphertext that Bob got. And then he decrypts it with his key. This is Bob's key. KB, K sub B is Bob's key. Right? So Bob decrypts it. And hopefully when he runs this algorithm, he should get the original message back. And now, depending upon the key, what kind of key you're using, you usually have two things, two possibilities. One is called symmetric key cryptography. The other is public key cryptography. And in symmetric key cryptography, Alice and Bob, they have the same key. So they have to use the same key. Right? Whatever key Bob is using, Alice has to use the same key. Right? And then it's symmetric. So just as an example, right? So let's try with the oldest known example of a symmetric key cryptography. So back about 2,000 years ago, maybe a little bit more, there was these days my wife watches a serial. It's what is it called? It's Greece and some guy in India, right? Alexander and Porus. I think there's a serial on some TV channel. Porus, yeah, that's right. But a little bit later, that was Greek. But in the Roman Empire, right, there was a guy called Julius Caesar. He was a Roman emperor. When we were kids, we used to read comic books. And in those days we had this, I was very happy to see that. See, when I was a kid, I would read this thing called Motu Patlu. And now they have this on TV. Right? Anyway, so those were the Hindi comics we read. And then they were, if you're fancy, some of my friends had these comic books called Tintin and Asterix. So in Asterix, we have this Emperor Julius Caesar, right? He's the Emperor of Rome and the Roman Empire in those days. And what people say is, Julius Caesar came up with one of the first encryption algorithms. And let's see what the encryption algorithm is. So we know English, so we'll just go with ABCD. X, Y, Z, and so on. These are not Roman alphabets, but let's go with this. What he would do is, so Julius Caesar used to fight a lot of wars. So he had generals all across, spread across Europe and North Africa and some parts of Western Asia. So he had to send them messages through messengers in those days, right? But he didn't want, in case the messenger was captured, he didn't want the messages to be leaked. Right? So what he'd say is, let's have an encryption algorithm where, as an example, every time, so let's say I want to write a message, right? Every time there's an A, I will write D instead. This will be E, this will be F, G, H, I, J. So this is B, so this will be C, this will be B, this will be A, and so on. So let's take a simple message, let's say hello. Let's make it on lowercase. Right? If I have to say hello, right, H, K, so this is K, E is H, what is L? M and O, I think. Right? O, 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 P, Q, R. Right? So this is my encryption. So this is what is called a substitution cipher. So you just plainly substitute it. So only if the guy knows that everything has been shifted by 3, then they can easily decrypt it. So now, so let's say this is my encryption algorithm. Right? So anytime you come up with an algorithm like this, what you have to worry is, okay, fine, this is encrypting it, but is it any good? So you should think in terms of the attacker. How difficult is it for the attacker to break your scheme? In the old days, maybe things were different, right? 2,000 years ago, things were different. There were no computers, or maybe, whatever. But now you should think in modern terms, how difficult is this? So if I knew, I'm the attacker, I'm truly, if I knew that you're using something like this, what will I do? How many keys are possible, right? So in this case, I shifted by 3. Another possibility was we just shift by 1. I, and this should be B, C, D, A. And so on. There should be a C1 here, there will be an E here, and all the way up to Z. Right? Then A, and so on. So it turns out that how many possibilities do I have? 25. So if I knew that what you are doing is you just are shifting. I don't know how much you have shifted, by 1, 2, or 3, or 4, or 5, but I know it's a shift. All I have to do is, I have to try out these 25 possibilities. And one of them will work out. So this one, where I try out all possible things that you can do, this is a brute force attack. Brute force means I don't know much, but I will try out everything that is possible. And one of them will definitely be the answer. Right? So trying 25 combinations is very easy. Not very difficult. You can do it in 5 minutes. So of course then this doesn't work so well. So we should try for something else. And the most easy way to change it is, here once you know this B, A is B, you know the rest. So the simplest thing is, let's not have this, right? So let's say I use M for A, N for B, B for C, and so on. So some random thing. So now what happens? Things become a little bit more complicated. Right? I have many, many different ways in which I can map this. Definitely more than 25. So let's see how many I have then. So for A, let me choose something. I choose M. I could have chosen B, I could have chosen E, anything I could have chosen. How many different choices did I have here? 25, or I could just say A is A. Right? If you want everything to be separate, then it's a different matter. And since I'm not, the order is not fixed anymore, in some cases I can even let A to be A, like B to be P, something else. So in that sense, if you allow me to choose A for A also, I have 26 options here, right? But let's say I have fixed M. Now for B, 25 choices, right? Anything except N. So let's say in this example we choose N. So we have 25 here. So for C, anything except M and N, and what did we choose here? B. So we have 24 choices, right? And so on. And then have one choice here, and two choices here, and three choices here. That's right. So the total number of choices that I have then is 26 factorial choices. Right? And I've written it down somewhere. This is about 10 to the 26. That's a very large number. You can spend all your life, you don't sleep, you don't drink, eat, anything, not be able to finish it in your lifetime. It's not just you. All of us in this room try to do this, we will not be able to do this. All people in India try to do this in their lifetime, they combined, we won't be able to get here. It's a very, very large number. Right? So then we say, oh, this is very good. We're all set. All done. Cryptography is solved, right? No need to do anything else. But it turns out that this is not the only way. So this works if the attacker has no other information and just does a brute force. But usually, in real life, we can use some other things. I'll come to that. So let's say this is English, right? And you have been observing the conversation between Alice and Bob for a long time. So you have enough of their ciphertext. Now in English, we have these 26 letters. If you take an English book, maybe that's what you should do today afternoon, right? Take an English book, and then you count how many A's are there, how many B's are there, how many C's are there. It turns out not all letters are equally common. In English, E and T, I think, yeah. E and T are the most common letters. And E is about 13%. This is about 9%. Right? So you can try this. So go to the library. It's a very good way to spend your time. Right? You go to the library, pick up a big book, and count the number of E's and T's and everything. And hopefully you can see that it's 13%. So what does that mean to me if I'm trying to break your encryption? What that means is, if I have enough of your ciphertext, I will see in the ciphertext, for example here, so this is the ciphertext that I have. This is a pretty small one, right? But let's say I have a lot of this. I will try to see which letter is the most common. And hopefully, C is the most common one in ciphertext. And I know the most common one is E. So I know that C maps to E then. Right? Similarly, I look for the second most common thing in the ciphertext. Whatever that is, that should be mapping to T. That's not the only thing. Sometimes you know who are talking to each other, right? In this case, let's say Alice and Bob are talking to each other. So when you send an email, I think younger people don't write names and other, you're not very formal anymore. But usually if you're sending an email, you would have the recipient's name and you would put your name in the end. Right? If I know that the email is from you and it's going to somebody, then I know the first few letters and the last few letters. Then I can easily map. In this case, if I have the email or whatever, I know the first three letters are Bob, last five letters are Alice. So in this case, I know what is the translation for Alice and Bob. Right, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. B is repeated. So I already know the translation for 7 of your letters. So that means what? Out of 26, I know 7. So what is remaining? What is 26 minus 7? 19? 19. Right, so I need to do 19 factorial. So coming from 26 factorial, my complexity reduces to 19 factorial. And I think this is about 10 to the power of 9 lower, so that should be 10 to the 17. Still a lot, but much, much more manageable than this. And that's not it, right? So I was talking about E and T, but in English, we have these words, it, in, the. Many words end in ing. These can be exploited. And these are what are called statistical techniques. I hope that's okay. Statistical analysis. Right? So either you can do brute force. So when you only have the ciphertext, right? You only have the ciphertext. You can do brute force or you can do statistical analysis. Sometimes you know the plain text, at least part of the plain text. Then you can figure out what they are. And in some cases what happens is, and this is what, not in symmetric key cryptography, but when we are talking about public key cryptography, what we will say is, you can actually encrypt any message you want using their key. So you know what the encryption will look like, but can you figure out the keys in the end, right? So that's the idea. But anyway. So fine. So far what we have been talking is giving you a basic idea in terms of plain text in English. But computers don't work on Alice and Bob and things like that, right? They work on binary numbers. Even though it says Alice and Bob, it will be converted to ASCII or whatever it is. It will be in terms of zeros and ones. So this message from Alice to Bob would be a string of zeros and ones. So the way computers will work is in terms of by treating the message in terms of blocks. So what they will do, so you have this. Something like this, right? This is your message that you need to encrypt. What computers do is they go in terms of blocks. So block is a group of bits. You can decide what should be the size of your group. In this case, let's keep life simple. Let's use blocks of 2 bits. So my job is easier. So then what I will do is, I will take 2 bits at a time and encrypt them. I could have taken 3, I could have taken 4, but just to make life easy, I'll just take 2 bits. And what did we do here? We had a table that says A is M, B is N, and so on. We also need a table here. But now, our table is like this. 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. So anytime you see 0, 0 in the message, like A, let's make something else. I will translate it to 1, 1 maybe. Anytime I see 0, 1, 1, 0. Maybe this is, no, it cannot be 1, 0 anymore. So this is 0, 0, 0, 1. So if I have to encrypt the message on top, then I see 0, 1, I go to the table. This is 1, 0. And 1, 0 is 0, 0. 1, 1 is 0, 1. This is 1, 1. I have encrypted my thing. This is what is called a block cipher. Something like this. But just in this the alphabet case, I said we could have many different possible mappings. Each one of them is a key. Right? That was a, so in one case we have 10 to the power of 26 factorial keys. In the first one we have 25 keys. How many possibilities are here? Right? Again, for 0, 0, I could have mapped it to 1, 1, or 1, 0, or 0, 1, or kept it 0, 0 itself. Right? So here I had 4 choices. So here I would have 3 choices, I would have 2 choices, and 1 choice. Once I have chosen this, I have 3 choices left here. Once I have chosen this, I have 2 choices left. Once I have chosen this, I have 1 choice left. So what is the number of choices? 4 factorial. Another way of thinking about this, what is my block size? Let's say K. This is my block size. K in this case is 2, right? So this is 2 to the power of K factorial. So what we want is, our system is more secure if the number of choices is larger. If the attacker has to choose from a large number of keys, of course that's more secure. If the attacker has 25 keys to choose from, he or she can break it much more easily than 10 to the power of 26. So we want this to be large as possible. So how do we make this larger? Make K larger, right? It's very easy. Make your block size larger. It's very good. So let's make our block size larger. And I have some numbers here. So what is 4 factorial, by the way? 24. So we have 24 keys here. This will be very easy for somebody to break, not very difficult. Right? So let's try 3. So this is 8 factorial. This one I hope you don't know. At least I'll be very ashamed of myself if you can calculate it on your head, because I can't do it. So I have it written down. This is 40,000. Oh, somebody knows it. Very good. 40,320. Just by increasing 1 bit of my block size, I came down here. Quite a lot of increase, right? Usually what we say is, we should have, this is 40,000 is still very easy for a computer to crack. We want something on the order of 64 bits as block sizes. So K is 64. So now you do this factorial. This is very large, right? And I don't know if I have it. Well, I have just written astronomical. Right? This is very large. Nobody can break it. Given enough time and resources, you can of course break it, but for all practical purposes, you cannot break it. So then we should use this. But then there's a problem. If I use 64 bits as my block size, think about my table. This was a table with 4 rows, right? Or 2 to the power of k rows. The number of rows is 2 to the power of k. And where is this table, by the way? My computer is encrypting it. It has to have this table. So the table has to be stored in its memory. So whenever a block comes in, you look up your memory, you look up the table in the memory and say, oh, 0, 0 is 1, 1. If you use k equals 64, the number of entries here will be 2 to the 64. Very, very large. Right? 2 to the 32 is a billion. That's already few gigabytes anyway. Right? A billion entries, each entry is 2 64-bit numbers. Right? So even if I did 32 here, let's see. 2 to the power 32 is 4 billion. Or 4G, let's say. Right? And here the numbers are 32 bits each. 32 bits is 4 bytes. So 4 plus 4 is 8 bytes. So 6, what is 32? Not 23. 32 GB. This is just your table. You have to store it in the memory. Your phone cannot handle it, right? Our phones these days, less than that. And this is just 32 bits. 64 bits will be so much more. You cannot store it in your table. You cannot store these things in your memory. Can an IoT device have 32 GB of memory on it? Very, very unlikely. You could have it, but the cost would increase tremendously. You don't want to pay that. Your IoT device will not be a $2, 100 rupee device anymore. So that's a practical problem. So the way we solve this practical problem is by doing something else, and this is just what we're talking about, to do something like this. We start with 64-bit inputs, right? We still have a block of 64 bits. What we do is, instead of handling these entire 64 bits all together, we break it up into pieces of 8 bits. And then we have tables. But these tables are 2 to the power of 8 tables, right? Or something like that. Imagine like that. So they're much more smaller. And then you look up these tables, you do the translation using 8 bits, you map those 8 bits into 8. And then you mix these bits up. And then you have a 64-bit output. You keep repeating this many, many times. So everything gets scrambled. And on the receiver side, you just do the reverse. Whatever you got, you first pass it through this scrambler. Scrambler just puts 1 bit here and there, so randomly. But this is known. Which bit will go? Bit number 1 will go to bit number 27. We know that. The standard will say that. So the attacker will also know that. Okay? So the attacker will also know that you are doing this. This is a publicly available thing. But the trick is in these tables. How do we choose these tables? The choice of the table depends on your key. Okay. Which table you will choose depends on your key. And the attacker doesn't know the key. Attacker can try all different possible combinations of the key here, but hopefully that is computationally very, very difficult to do. It takes a long time to try out all the possible tables. This is a general idea. And if you look at what existing standards do, one of the common one is what is called DES, or usually we say DES. Data encryption standard came out in the US. It was developed back in the 70s actually, but it became well known in the early 90s. And your block size is 64, and the key is again 56-bit key. And just to give you, we don't want to get into the details of this, as it's too crazy. But anyway, what we do is we start with a 64-bit input, and then we go through a series of 16 different, you see this? I say we go through a table, we translate things, and then we scramble and then go back. We do this 16 times. Something like that. Right? It's a block size.
So what's the key stand for, sir? 54-bit key?
So 54-bit key says, depending on the bits, there are many different choices of this table. Which table am I going to choose? That will be determined by the key. And if I want to communicate with you, you and I, before communication, we have to decide these are the 56, exact 56 bits we're using. 0011, whatever it is. But you have to know it, I have to know it. Then only it works.
So you will choose the table, which table you are actually using?
Based on those 56 bits in the key. And you know, again with all of these things, you know, there's a lot of political stuff. So many people say the US government already has backdoors to it. So they know how to break all of it. And if you want to believe it, you believe it. Don't want to believe it, don't believe it, whatever you want. But anyway, so this was developed back in the 70s. So now computers are powerful enough to break this within a few hours, less than an hour. So then people try to develop something better. So in this case, what happens is we take the 64-bit, we look up the table 16 times, and we have the output. One improvement of this is, now you repeat this whole thing 3 times. So effectively, you'll be doing this, what is 16 times 3? 48, right? You'll be repeating this 48 times. It will be much more difficult. And that is what is called triple DES. Where is triple DES? 3DES. Do I have it anywhere here? No. Anyway, so that's the next one. And what we typically use now is something called AES, Advanced Encryption Standard. And this one is much more powerful. And if you have a computer, theoretically, let's say you have a computer which can break DES in 1 second. Let's say you have a powerful enough computer to do that. The same computer would require roughly 150 trillion years to break AES. So far there are no well-known ways to break AES, and it's still used. We don't use DES anymore. Triple DES, yes. AES, yes. But hopefully I will have time to at the end today, and then we'll see that even these things, right, we have to go through these operations. For a power-starved IoT device, these can be very, very difficult. It takes a lot of energy to run this. So there are versions of this or variations of this which are specifically aimed at IoT device. Something called Simon. This is weaker than this. This is not as strong as AES, but then if you think my IoT device is just measuring something non-critical. I want to save power, so this is like a trade-off. You compromise on some of the security, but doesn't consume so much energy. Okay, so fine. So now what we have done is we have looked at symmetric key cryptography, and it works fine and everything is good. But there's one fundamental problem, and like you asked, the key thing, right? It's symmetric key, which means you and I, we should have the same key. Let's say you want to send an email to somebody in the US whom you have never met before. And you want to send an encrypted message to that person. But you have never met him or her, so of course you don't have a shared key with that person. With Julius Caesar, before the generals would leave, they would meet Caesar and they would agree, okay, this is our key. But if you have not met a person anywhere before in your life, how can you have a key with them? So that's the fundamental problem with symmetric key cryptography. So to solve that, and this was a problem for humanity for the last 2000, or how long humanity has been around, right? Finally solved in about mid-1970s. No one knows exactly when, because many of these were military secrets. So they wouldn't, even though they had the technology, they wouldn't go out and tell people. The first publicly available came out, I think, in 77, probably, is my guess. Anyway, mid-70s. Okay? So if you have not met the person ever, how do you have a key? Where did it go? Anyway, so one way of solving this is through something called public key cryptography. And in public key cryptography, in symmetric key cryptography, the sender has a key, the receiver has a key. Same key. In public key cryptography, everybody has two keys. I have two keys, you have two keys, everybody has two keys. One is the public key. So Bob's public key, I'm denoting by K of B says Bob's key, and the plus on top says it's public. Public means it's known to everybody. Alice knows this, and even Trudy knows this. So everybody knows this. Plus, well, in addition, Bob also has a private key. And the private key is denoted by minus sign on top. And private means only Bob knows this. Nobody else in the world is supposed to know this. And similarly, Alice will have her own key, KA plus and KA minus. So Alice's key and Bob's key are not the same anymore. So everybody has to have two different keys. Okay? And what happens, let's say Alice wants to send a message to Bob. Alice will write her message in plain text. Then she has to encrypt it. Previously we had a shared key, so I encrypt it with the shared key. Now what I'll do is, in order to encrypt it, I'm going to use Bob's public key. I'm sending the message to Bob, so I use Bob's public key. And I encrypt it and I send it. And in order to decode it, Bob will take the cipher text, which is here, and decrypt it using his private key. Now, if you look at Trudy, she can see this cipher text. She also knows Bob's public key. By looking at the cipher text, and the public key, you should not be able to convert back to the original plain text. To get back to the original plain text, only possible if you have this thing, private key of Bob. And the private key is private, nobody else has it. This is something. When is the India-Sri Lanka match? Today or tomorrow?
Today.
All right.
Today.
I never get to watch, so today I thought I'll watch. Yeah. So, hang on, what was I saying? Yeah. So in order to decrypt it, you really need this private key. So nobody else can figure it out. And this is what it should be. So there are two requirements. We have to choose the keys, right, in such a way that after I encrypt with the public and I decrypt with the private, I get the original message back. And even if somebody knows the public key, which everybody knows, they should not be able to get the message back. Those are requirements. And there's some math behind it, and there are many different ways of doing this. But the most common one is something called RSA, and it stands for Rivest, Shamir, and Adelson. These are the three people who invented this back in the 70s. So this is after them. And we'll see how we can do this. Now, all of this is based on modulo arithmetic. Right? And if you remember what is modulo arithmetic, let me delete it. Essentially, you divide, so A modulo B is you divide A by B and you just take the remainder. Right? That's modulo arithmetic. So x modulo n is you divide x by n and whatever is the remainder. So just as a quick example, 7 modulo 3. So you divide 7 by 3. 2 times 3 is 6. Remainder is 1. Right? Something like that. Now before we carry on, some properties are good to know. If you have a modulo n, you take a number a, modulo n, take another number b modulo n, and then take the modulo of this. It is the same as if you don't have to do this individually. You take a plus b, take modulo n, it's the same thing. It also works for negative, minus. Similarly, if you have a modulo n and b modulo n and you're multiplying them together, whatever is the product, you take modulo n. It is the same as if you just multiply a and b directly and take modulo n. It's the same thing. And what this also says is, if you think of a modulo n and instead of b, you just put a again. A modulo n times a modulo n, that's sort of like a modulo n to the power of 2. Right? So this will give you, instead of doing a modulo n, just do a to the power of d. Take the same thing. These are something which you use. So you can verify that I'm not lying. These are really true, right? And we don't need to spend time on it. All right. That's one background. The other thing that we are talking about is we are encrypting a message in a computer. So it's a string of binary numbers. Right? But let's say that our block size was 64 there, right? So it's a 64-bit binary number. I can either encrypt it like a binary number, or I could also do is, I could convert it to decimal, which is easier to visualize here. A computer will do it in binary anyway, but we will just think of it, any binary number I can convert to a decimal number. So encrypting the binary is the same as encrypting the decimal number. Right? So we will work with decimal. So for example, if your message is this, so let's assume I have an 8-bit binary number. I just convert it to decimal, 145. So encrypting this message is the same as encrypting the number 145. So I will send the number 145, but you will see some other crazy number, maybe 376. So you don't know that what I'm sending is 145. Conceptually same thing. All right. So now let's start with the basics, right? So the first step in order to do this, we have to do two things, right? We have to encrypt our messages. So we have to come to an encryption algorithm at some point. But before we come to the encryption algorithm, we have to worry about the keys. We need the keys in the first place. So how do I generate the keys? So in order to generate the keys, you first start with two large prime numbers. P and Q. How large is large? Usually the standards will say it should be at least 10 to the 24 bits. Very large. Very large numbers. How do I find these large numbers? There are well-known algorithms for doing that. So you can easily find large numbers. And there are many such large numbers. You don't have to worry about that. It's not like, we may imagine, that's what I would think as a kid. As you go for larger and larger numbers, primes become rare. It's not true. There are a lot of large prime numbers, not a problem. You can find. You can choose yours, I can choose mine, and they will not be the same. Anyway, so there are a lot of large prime numbers, and there are ways of picking them. The next step, what you will do is, you will make a n, number n, which is just multiplication of P and Q. And this is Z, right? But if you go to the US, this is Z. So when I went there for PhD, when I used to say Z, I used to say Z. And then color, I would write C-O-L-O-U-R. Americans would write C-O-L-O-R. And my advisor would correct me. And he would say, he is American, of course. He'd say, we didn't go to World War II and save the British from the Germans to follow their spelling. Right? We will follow our own spelling. I also said, yeah, sure. The British came and ruled over us for hundreds of years. I'm not going to follow British spelling anymore. So I also do American spelling. So this is Z now. Okay, this is not Z anymore, this is Z. And Z is P minus 1 times Q minus 1. So whatever prime you have chosen, Z will be P minus 1 times Q minus 1. Alright, fine. Third step, you have to choose a number E such that E should be less than N. That's one condition. And E should have no common factors with Z. Right? So what we call relatively prime. E and Z should not have any common factors. That's one. Next, we choose a number such that, so you have to already chosen E in step 3. You have to choose D such that E times D minus 1 is exactly divisible by Z. You choose a D such that ED minus 1 is exactly divisible by Z. Or, equivalently, if you just divide ED by Z, you should have 1 left. So this is modulo 1. And then once you have done it, now you have your keys. Your key is, the public key is n comma 8, 2 numbers, n from here and E from here, that's the public key. And n comma D, those 2 numbers become your private key. And then, once we have the keys, now we can do our encryption and decryption. In order to encrypt it, this is my plain text message M. I have to take the message I'm trying to encrypt, raise it to the power of E. Take modulo N. That's my ciphertext. Encryption is done. At the receiver side, you will get this number. This is the ciphertext you'll get. You should get the original message back now. So you'll take the ciphertext, from the other key, you raise it to the power of D. Take modulo N, and in the end, the maths is such that everything E and D and everything has been chosen in such a way that you'll get N back. We can prove it. I don't want to prove it. But we can. So let's see how this works out. Right? So let's work through an example. So first step says choose 2 large prime numbers P and Q. They should be 1, 0, 2, 4 bits. I'm not choosing such big numbers for illustration. Let's just pick 2. P and Q are 5 and 7. Right? So these are my 2 prime numbers that I've chosen. In real life, you'll choose much bigger prime numbers. So now we can do step 2. Step 2 says n equals P times Q. It's not 37. It's 35. N is PQ, and Z is P minus 1 times Q minus 1, so 4 times 6. 24. And that's very easy enough. Now step 3 says we have to choose E such that E is less than N. So our E has to be less than 35. And E and Z should not have any common factors. Z is 24. So let's try. What are my choices for E? Yeah, sure. So I taught for about 15 years in the US, and it was much more. You come in and go whenever you want. You want to sit like this, that's fine. So if you really want to sit like this, it's fine with me. I don't care. You want to bring your food and drinks and eat here, drink, that's fine too. No, I don't care. So we would do that quite easily. It's okay. Maybe we find, the day I finished my PhD, my advisor said, so anyway, we wouldn't call them, they wouldn't agree to sir, and I think we have to call them at most professor. Now you have to call me by my first name. His name is Kenneth. And it was very difficult for me, right? How can I call you Ken? You get used to it. So I call him Ken now. He's 60 years old, and even 80-year-old people, I would call them by their first name. And that's just, there's no right or wrong way of doing things. It's just different cultures do things differently. So, you can be very, very relaxed here. I don't have no constraints, no rules. Do whatever you want to do. Yeah, so now E has to be less than 35, and it should not have any common factors with 24. So what are my options? 1. 1 times 24 is 24, so bad choice, doesn't work. 2. 2 times 12 is 24, doesn't work. 3. 8 3s are 24. 6 4s are 24. 5. It works. So we could, did I choose 5? Yeah, so we can choose 5. This is not the only option. You could choose 9, for example, or 11. Anything will work. Let's just go with this. Next step is D. We have to choose such that ED minus 1 is exactly divisible by Z, right? Or ED modulo Z is 1. So let's say our E is 5, right? We have already chosen E. What are our choices of E or D? And ED. And let's say ED modulo Z. I can choose D to be 1. ED will be 5. 5 divided by 25 will be 5. Modulo will be 5, right? I can try 2 here. This is 10. This is 10. 3. 15. This is 15. 4 is 20. This is still 20. 5 is 25. 1. So this one is a choice. So I could choose D equals 5. But if I choose this, everything will work out, not a problem. But this is not a good choice. Why? Because I've already chosen E to be 5. So my public key and my private key will both become the same. Ideally, I wouldn't want to do that. The encryption and decryption algorithms will work, but not. So we can keep trying many things. There are many possibilities. And you can see that 29 will be okay. There are other numbers also which will work. But let's just say it's 29. So KB plus the public key is then, what is it? N comma E. 35 comma 5. And the private key is 35 comma, what did we choose? 29. So now let's try and encrypt our message. What is the message we are trying to encrypt? Let's see. Here. Let's say this is the message I want to encrypt. 0001100. Convert this into decimal. This is 12. So how do we encrypt? M to the power of E modulo n. So if I do m to the power of E, that is 12 to the power of 5. It's this number. And then modulo 20, modulo 35, answer will be 17. So my ciphertext is 17. So the message I wanted to send is 12, but what I'm actually sending in ciphertext is 17. So you don't know that it's actually 12. So Bob will get this number 12, and he has to decrypt it. How do we decrypt? You take the ciphertext, raise it to the power of D. So ciphertext is 17, D is 29. So 17 to the power of 29. It's a very big number here. Right? And then do modulo n. Divide by 35, take the remainder, but answer still comes out to be 12. So this is symmetric key cryptography. Sorry, public key cryptography. Was there a question on something? Yeah.
What effect does that 29 made? Because 5 have also done it.
Yeah.
Why are we making calculation tedious? And D is private for me.
The answer is usually you want to make them as large as possible, so it's more difficult for the attacker to guess.
But 5 will also do.
5 will also do.
Attacker will do with the 5 also. I am taking 29 at my home side.
That's
But
right.
attacker will go with the 5 also, he will get it. So my question is why I have chosen the private key 5 instead of 529 for me.
Right. The way it will actually work is, so you cannot, so let's go to this thing and find, and then let's jump a few slides to answer your question. So if you really wanted to break this, right, you need to know that 5 or 29 or something, right? You need to know, you know N and E from the public key. You need to know that D. In your case, D could be 29 or 5. But we need to come up with some value of D that works. How do I do that? Essentially, you know this N. You have to break it into 2 prime numbers, P and Q. Otherwise, you'll just be guessing. Guessing 1, 2, 3, 4. You don't know that it is 29 or 5. You have a whole large space to search. If I were, if instead of using 1024 bits, I could just use 8 bits. Then the possible numbers you have to choose from is 0 up to 64. Much easier. If I make this larger, your choice for D, E and, well, you know E anyway, your choice for D is from a much larger range. In this case, it just happened to be 5, right? But in general, you don't know. So you have to keep trying. Something will work. But if I make your range of search larger, it will take you much longer to search through that entire space. In our case, it just worked out that because I had chosen such small numbers, 5 is working. If I choose a bigger number, maybe 5 doesn't work. Something bigger will work. So it's a trade-off between your computational complexity and how much difficult you want to make life for the attacker. The only way you can find this P and Q is, you know N, and you know N is P times Q. So essentially it's a factorization problem. I have given you a large number N, and you factorize into 2 prime numbers. There is no well-known solution for doing this efficiently. It's a very difficult problem. If I made E and if I make all these numbers smaller and smaller, you have to search through a smaller space. If I make N very large, you have to factorizing a very large number. So much more difficult. That's the answer.
Actually, my question is not choice of E and E. Let me put it in some other words. See, I started with something, let them be 1, 0, 2, 4 bit, everything. My question is, I had an option of D.
Okay, so now I get your question. You started with something, 5 was working, why did I go for 29?
Yes.
In this case, I did that because my E was also 5. If that happened, my private key and public key would both be the same.
Okay, but in that case, we have changed E because the public key is known to everyone, and
You could do
that
that.
would have been tough.
This is just a
then I have made my life hell, taking it at 29 where 5 would have worked.
The thing is, the way these things, so I understand your point, right? If this was the way you are implementing thing, fine, go ahead. The way you will do it is, how do you get these in the first place anyway? The way we do it is, first you have to generate the prime numbers on your own. Usually the algorithm, the way it works is, it starts with a very large random number and then tries to find prime numbers around it. Okay? So you really don't have it. So when I say choose 2 prime numbers, you don't really choose it. The computer chooses it. Right? And you have no choice on what numbers it will choose. If you are doing by hand everything else, I agree. Make this more and it's fine. But then if you make this higher, this will become larger. M to the E. Right? So you may save something here, but this one will go up. So, you had a question somewhere here.
Yeah, if I have text file to encrypt, so how would you go about the encryption?
You wouldn't use this.
Huh?
You will not use this.
Okay.
So now let's come to answering your question then. So if you have a text file, or let's say I want to encrypt I just took a picture which is 4 megabytes. I want to encrypt this. This will be a very, very large number. I will try to do this exponent. It will take a very, very long time. And maybe, numbers have some precision. When in your computer, you use a certain number of bits to represent your numbers. A 4 GB thing, if you raise it to the exponent of even small numbers, it will be so large that you will lose your precision. So the answer is, you typically don't use this for encryption. So let me come to this. Right? In practice, RSA is computationally very, very intensive. And like if you have a big number, it's intensive because you're going m to the power of e and so on. Right? So exponential is very, very complicated. It takes a lot of time and energy. Right? On the other hand, DES, which is symmetric key, is 100 times faster. Right? Much, much faster. So this is what is done in real life. The problem with symmetric key was, I have never met you. So we don't have a symmetric key to start with. Right? So this is what I will do. I want to send a message to you, a big file to you. I've never met you, so we don't have a key. But what we have is the public keys and private keys. I want to have a communication with you. What I will do is, I will generate a random key first. Okay. This is my symmetric key that I want to use with you. But you don't know this yet. So I generate a key that I want to use with you. I will encrypt it with your public key. Send it to you. You decrypt it. You have your key. Now we both have a shared key KS, which is also usually sometimes called a session key, let's say. Now we go use this for symmetric key cryptography. So usually most of the time in real world, what happens is, we only use public key cryptography to set up an initial session key between different users. Once I choose a key that I want to use for AES or DES, I tell the other party what key we are going to use. And this initial one we use public key. From now on, we both use the same symmetric key to do either triple S or AES, whatever you want to use, we use. That's the way. You try to, so for all practical purposes, this kind of encryption gets very, very complicated after 128, 256, 512 bits. It's not used for bigger than that. 10, 20. Let's take a 10-minute break and then we come back at 10:30. It's a video camera. Yeah. That's all I